We're ready.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Dyan. I teach American government at the University of Evansville.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Eastburn. I am an, excuse me, long day. I am an attorney and I'm in Madison, Wisconsin.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Tinder and I'm an attorney in Charleston, West Virginia.
Who's going first?
Good evening. My name is Michaela Chacon.
I'm Evan Grover.
I'm Sierra Sweetman.
I'm Aaliyah Westlake, and we're all sophomores at Cottonwood Classical Preparatory School in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and our teacher is Bill Torres.
Terrific. Well, we're eager to hear what you have to say about legislative oversight. I'll read question 2 to you, and then the floor is yours. The question reads as follows. Members of Congress are not only legislators, but they, quote, are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of the public officers. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory powers? Explain the differences, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? Finally, how effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers?
In a letter from former Continental Congress delegate Thomas McCain to the great philosopher and second president of the United States, John Adams, there is one quote about Congress that stands out. It reads as, "May the Almighty give the Congress and our generals wisdom, fortitude, and perseverance." These three adjectives are of the utmost importance for congressmen to exhibit, especially in a time of investigation led by Congress. These investigations should be conducted as any other and are essential aspect for our nation. To get an idea of how effectively they have used this power, we must take a look into when and why they have in past examples. An example of this would be from 1932 to 1934, when Congress launched the Committee on Banking and Currency Investigation of Wall Street. During the Red Scare and McCarthyism, our Congress launched another investigation, which became known as Senate Committee on Government Operations, along with the HUAC hearings where members from the House of Representatives investigated alleged communists. There was another investigation during the Watergate scandal, the Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities.
In recent history, there have been investigations about the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the investigation about Russian interference in the 2016 US election. The common trait is that all of these investigations take place during a time when America is divided and at a low point. During these low points of our nation's history, Congress has used their investigatory powers to figure out what is going on to prevent these times from happening again, and by trying to unite the country. However, there have been certain times where the power of investigation has been used to further divide people and push a more political agenda, such as Russiagate during and after the 2016 election. However, it is very uncommon and unusual. Because of this, we argue that the Congress has used their powers of investigation effectively and with the purpose to help the American people. The Constitution says nothing specifically about congressional investigations and oversight, but the authority to conduct them is implied since Congress possesses all legislative powers. To be able to carry out these powers, they need to have proper information on what is going on in the government. Congressional oversight refers to the review, monitoring, and supervision of federal agencies, programs, and policy implementation.
It provides the legislative branch with the ability to oversee the executive branch and its agencies to ensure that there's no corruption, fraud, or waste of funds. Examples of oversight can be seen when Congress decides how much money a department will receive and where that money will be put towards. Oversight is also used to ensure that laws are being enforced the way Congress intended. On the other hand, congressional investigation not only helps legislators make better policy decisions, but can be essential to the system of checks and balances. Investigatory hearings can uncover presidential abuses of power and corruption, which can be essential to the impeachment process. This power is usually delegated to committees composed of both members of houses. Investigations are conducted to gather information on the need for future legislation and to test the effectiveness of laws already passed. We believe that the power of oversight is more important because it ensures the idea of checks and balances by letting Congress look over the executive branch and make sure they are not abusing power and enforcing Congress's laws the right way.
We believe that Congress has effectively used their power of oversight in some cases, but that there's been a lack of it. In 1976, Congress passed the National Emergencies Act. Here, Congress did not sufficiently use their power of oversight well because they never reviewed an emergency until 2019, despite the fact that there are many between 2019 and 1976. On the other hand, several important laws provided broad mandates for the power of congressional oversight. For example, the Government of Performance and Results Act of 1993 required the executive agencies to consult Congress when developing strategic plans and to report their goals, plans, and results annually to the Government Accountability Office. The framers put in place a system of checks and balances for our government. The use of congressional oversight and investigation are an example of that. The use of them should be fair and rigorous, but because of the way politics are today, they sometimes aren't used fairly. However, when they are, they can be used to uncover misuses of power and help further guide federal investigations.
Let me unmute myself and tell you that that was terrific. Now we're going to ask you some questions, and I'd like to start by asking about what happens when Congress, you said that oversight is monitoring and reviewing the activity of the executive agencies. What happens when Congress doesn't like what it finds? What sort of tools does Congress have to try to reorient the behavior of the bureaucrats?
I think because Congress is in charge of a lot of the finances and a lot of the support that goes to these different agencies, one way they could do it is by limiting the amount of money and what is put towards within those agencies. And I think that's really effective because if that agency doesn't have money to do something, then they're not able to do it. And I think if Congress sees something that is not how it's supposed to work or unfair or various other aspects that's just not right, they can limit the amount of money that's being put towards them. So therefore it would limit the amount of like negative aspects that are coming out of that agency.
And also having like a limited amount of money means that you can only have a limited amount of employees, which would limit their effectiveness and ability to do anything at all, because the less employees they had, the less they would be able to achieve.
Okay, thank you.
So you guys mentioned in your opening statement this Emergencies Act in 1976 and how it's not really been used. The first time it was used was in 2019, which underscores a larger problem here potentially is why do you think Congress has not used its oversight power as much?
The ability to use the oversight power means that Congress has to agree on something that they need to investigate, and they need to agree on something as a whole. But because of that, how divided they are today, we're unable to agree on things often.
Yeah, agreeing with what my colleague said. Because we're so politicized and divided politically, I think it's really hard for one side and the other side to come together as a whole. And I think we see that quite a bit in Congress and within other parts of our government.
I agree with my colleagues. We are so politically divided today that it said that Congress can't even come together for the good of the people and to better the United States as a country in a whole.
And then on the other hand of what my colleagues have said, it also in an investigation, they have to gather a lot of evidence and it can be very time consuming. And this is on top of like new things that might come up in our nation, which I think they choose to ignore some and then move towards others.
If this hyper-partisanship is so detrimental and has such a negative effect, what suggestions do you have to deal with it?
I think it kind of comes with time. We can see that in times of crisis, and like, for example, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, parties came together, and I think people from all different aspects of life came together. And I think because it was such a giant blow to our country that we kind of put our ideas aside and we all came together for the good. And I think that just kind of happens with time. And I think as we learn more and more about each other and are more comfortable around each other, then we kind of push those ideas to the side and like get to know each other for who we truly are.
I do think there are some things in place as well, such as the Congressional Research Service and the Government Accountability Office. And they're just supposed to do policy and legal analysis solely based on facts and without party affiliation. So I think those are some places where that isn't there.
Well, like my colleague said, that there are other agencies that are in control of investigating smaller things and things that we don't really find all of us coming together on. But to disagree with my colleague Evan, I believe that because of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, we were able to see that whenever we're in a state of emergency, sometimes we don't come together, we come further divided. And so I think we've moved very far away from 9/11 when we all came together when something terrible happened to COVID-19 and us all even dividing more when something terrible happens.
To add on to what my colleague Aaliyah said, in these COVID times, we have seen how different political parties have been even more divided. And for example, mask mandates, vaccines, and yeah, it just shows that we couldn't really come together for the better of our country.
Thank you.
So as I understand it, oversight is about monitoring the agencies of the executive branch. I'd like to ask, to what extent does the confirmation process allow Congress a chance to direct or influence the behavior of the executive agencies? The confirmation process.
Well, with Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation, we saw a lot of that, of whatever political party controls Congress and controls those investigations that are happening can kind of influence who's getting elected. And whenever Obama wanted to appoint a Supreme Court justice at the end of the term and he wasn't allowed to, and then Amy Coney Barrett's appointment, we saw very different times of people using their powers and using it to further their own goals.
Do you guys see any, are there any limits on Congress's power to investigate?
I
And
think
if so, what are they?
well, yes, I would say that we mentioned, referring back to our original statement, we talked about how that Congress follows an investigation as any other. I think that's still like basic human rights still apply. Like they can't just go in without a warrantless search, which would be a part of their investigation. And I think there are still those fundamental aspects within our US Constitution and within other ideas that we all possess so greatly, that Congress can't overstep without tremendous backlash or like protest.
They also have a way of self-imposing restrictions on the power of oversight because, as I said, the whole Congress has to come together and decide on one thing to investigate. And because they're so divided, they kind of check themselves in some ways.
And then also the Senate can bring the investigations to court. And we see this in the Eastland versus US Senate Men's Fund. And so in there, they asked the bank for records and the bank refused. And so the Senate took it to court and the court said that the Senate does have the power to investigate and they have the ability to look at those funds. So they have. Yeah.
The executive branch has been using executive orders. What impact does that have on the legislative branch, and should there be any changes made in that?
What have we got?
Good job.
All right, we're going to give you some comments now after your presentation. First of all, I refuse to believe that you guys are sophomores. You're too poised and too smart to be just sophomores. I think you are ringers from New Mexico. You gave us lots of good examples to start out, which was a terrific way to start. You told us about the National Emergency Act, which we haven't heard much about today. And I thought that was an effective way to illustrate what you were trying to say. During the Q&A, I thought the answers were quite good. We asked about ways that Congress could behave, and you went straight to power of the purse, which is pure constitutional checks and balances. One minor quibble, and I probably agree with what you were saying, but a common complaint about Congress is that they need to stop bickering and come together and do what's right for America. Well, I think the reason why they're bickering is because they don't agree on what's right for America. So that's the fundamental problem is both sides often genuinely agree that what they're doing is standing for a fundamental principle that the other side wants to undermine. I liked the interplay between the two of you about um, how do we get out of this? That was a good question that was asked. And then one last thing is a small thing. Well, one and a half things, sorry. I would have liked a few more Supreme Court cases that have to do with oversight power, but right at the end, you came in with a really good one. So I think that beefed up the overall performance. With respect to confirmation, you might have thought about maybe cabinet secretaries who oversee the agencies, who run the agencies, as opposed to just thinking about Supreme Court appointments. I know those are the ones that occupy all the attention and they deserve that prominence. But as far as legislative oversight, there are other people who are subject to confirmation, like Secretary of Education or the EPA administrator and so on. But on balance, it was a terrific performance, and my hat's off to you guys for doing such a good job at such a young age.
Yeah, so I just want to echo a lot of that and start off by noting that, the initial question here is how effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? And you guys you answered it directly, that Congress has used its powers effectively to help the American people. So that is, sometimes people might think that's a small thing that you answer the question, but that is sometimes half the battle is answering the question. So thank you for that. I thought you had a nice quote to start your presentation with the 3 adjectives: the wisdom, fortitude, and perseverance. You gave a whole list of historical examples of investigations. The Wall Street investigation 1932, which might have been the first time that I've heard that mentioned, McCarthy, Watergate, 9/11, and then the Russian interference. So a lot of historical examples, very thorough in that regard in the opening statement. And so, but then moving over into the question and answer, just looking at my notes here, actually, let me just go back. One thing that I really thought was sort of nuanced and well said was I think it was with investigation, that the part of investigation, there's like a 2-part focus here, which is one, to gather information, and then also to test effectiveness and of that legislation, which I thought is a very a high level way of saying that. And oftentimes I think investigation or oversight, you think about the spicy cases of investigation or oversight, but it's also to see, okay, hey, like, is this law functioning the way it should? If not, what do we need to do? And the answer is you gather information, then you theoretically will tweak the law if you can. So I thought that was a really nice point that you made. Yes, so I also appreciated there was some good constructive disagreement on one of the questions. I think that Robert alluded to that a little bit. It might have been Tom's question, so I thought that was good. And again, there are a lot of teams that don't do that, and I think being sophomores and you guys are being able to do that in this presentation in the Q&A period, I thought was a really great hallmark of your ability to critically engage with the subject matter. So good job to you. I would also, just to comment on the examples, I think some of your answers could have been well served with a little bit more historical concrete examples or Supreme Court cases. And the one that was mentioned at the end was a nice one to leave the presentation with, sort of that in our ears. And so that was good, persuasive there at the end. So thank you very much.
I just say very quickly that I thought you did a very good job, and you had a good 4-minute opening presentation, and then like, you all have different things you're going to say. I want you to know, and you probably already understand this, but we as judges, we have our own questions that we're going to ask, and one of my questions was about the power of the purse, and you just took care of that, and I didn't get a chance to ask that particular question. I mean, you were reading my mind. You knew that's where I was coming from about how Congress uses the power of the purse. Well done. I thought your examples were good. I particularly liked at the end there where you talked about COVID and the impact that COVID has had, the pandemic has had on our country. And I agree with you. And I think that's the first time we've had that mentioned, even though that is such a cloud over all of our lives. Very, very good job. I just have to commend you, and I don't really have any particular items to suggest to you to change other than I second the comment that was made earlier about maybe give us some more examples to flesh out your particular opinion. Just let me say lastly to you, congratulations on a job well done. And you certainly have a lot of knowledge and a lot of leadership at, for us, a very young age. And you must continue to use that leadership and that knowledge and be good citizens for decades to come, because you are the future of New Mexico and you are the future of our country. And we need to have you stay involved and participate. Thank you very much. Good luck to you. Take care.
Thank you.
Good job.